when Dr. Brown and I were talking, I said I would share some recent resilient rate related projects that have come in over the past and current fiscal year. Just a little more than a year ago today, you all heard about the resilience grants that were funded on a resilience specific FOA a few years ago through the OppNet initiative. And congratulations yet again on our framework. We have a strong trans-agency working group. We have a framework and variables and processes on which we agree. And one thing we don't necessarily have, however, as Laverne pointed out, we don't have a lot of an audience yet because they don't know about us. And it's not as if we have a budget. And without a budget, one has to influence science in other ways. And I only say that because these projects I'm going to describe to you obviously have come in through other means, and yet they're related. The means through which these projects have come in is through a FOA whose last due date is this coming March 17th. Research on biopsychosocial factors of social connectedness, on isolation, on various aspects of health. OppNet, like our group, is a completely Trans-NIH initiative. And though we also have a K award running right now, when it comes to research mechanisms, we tend to go with a very flexible R01 because that is the one mechanism that all the ICs share, whereas R03s and R21s are much more discretionary in terms of structure or using it at all. You can see that model animal and human subjects projects were welcome. When it came to human subjects, just basic experimental trials were allowed, not clinical trials. And we're all very literate. I don't particularly care for people to read slides to me. And I hope you have had enough time while I've gone on that you can see the details, unless you all had any questions while we're here. I don't hear any questions, but I will point out that you see the PAR numbers there here and throughout the presentation. There are embedded hyperlinks, and as you all have the presentations in the invitation, you can link to our PARs. You can also link to all of the active projects. Here you can see the 3 receipt dates. You can see our N of applications, and the 7 projects I'm going to tell you about. 2 directly highlight resilience, and 5 of them speak to our working group's framework. Those of you who have been around NIH a bit can see, might recognize paper applications. If not, these are among the last set of paper applications that ever came into our agency. Pictogrants.gov just didn't seem to make it. So here we are in our first project, that understanding how social connectedness protects older results in cognitive health. And though resilience is not in the title, you can see here that the concept that social connectedness confers resilience by leveraging existing infrastructure, a multi-method approach, and an interdisciplinary research team. Similar to our framework, you can see that this project looks at biological as well as interpersonal and social projects that they hope, once their data are collected and analyzed, can lead to specific target points, processes, types of interactions that can perhaps stave off progress of Alzheimer's, slow it, and reduce the burden on people with Alzheimer's and related dementias, their families, their other loved ones, and the entire healthcare system. And NIA funded this project out of its congressional appropriation for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Here is another one that NIA funded with the R word right up front: resilience, cultural alignment, and social support in brain aging, data from the Strong Heart study. That is the logo of the Strong Heart study, an already ongoing cohort project on inflammation, cardiovascular disease, and the range of dementias among Native American populations. AI is the abbreviation here because that, when you look at the abstract and throughout that project, they use American Indian as their term. And you can see here that they're focusing on remarkable psychosocial resilience, which they think relates to the community environment, cultural identity, and robust social support. I'll let you read the rest of this, except to point out they believe that there is an interaction between psychosocial resilience and cognitive reserve, which I think is how they operationalize resilience against the neurodegeneration in Alzheimer's and related dementias. Though I read more of the slide, an interesting related tidbit is comes from Christine Hunter, OBSSR's deputy director, who's also a captain in the public health service. Christine just returned this week from her deployment at a reservation out west in a tribal community health center. And one thing that really struck her was the lack of vaccine hesitancy, and instead of hesitancy was the overwhelming support that these members of these tribal nations took to bring one another to the vaccine sites. So people of first the elders and then in the subsequent waves, there was tremendous openness, receptiveness to the vaccine, as well as supporting one another's to do so. Oh, I'm sorry, Janine, was there anything you wanted to say about this project too?
I'll just again reflect, I'm sure all of us at this point are well committed to increasing representation of underrepresented minority groups in our research. This is also very important to NIA. And then I'll just note something that came up at the forum a year ago, and I'm speaking on behalf here of Molly Wagster, so I don't want to misstate, but the concept of cognitive reserve and resilience is slightly different than the current definition of resilience being used by this group. I think they're compatible, but they are slightly different. There is a NIA-funded cognitive reserve and resilience collaboratory project where they're working on definitions through annual meetings. I think it's something that we on the NIA side, and hopefully with your help, can work to try to increased translatability, if not harmonization, across our definitions so that we can make sure that we're working in a synergized way.
Are you able to let us know details? Can anybody else join?
I can let you know details. I believe I feel like I just received yesterday the information about the next meeting, which may be in the fall, and I will distribute that link and also touch base with Molly and John King to make sure that it's joinable. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
That's great. And Janine, if you have any notes about how I might revise this slide to reflect those similarities and differences, do let me know offline.
Okay.
Thanks. And speaking of minority populations, this is a project that NIMHD and OppNet are co-funding to look at reducing suicidal ideation among young, you see here, sexual minority women during the course of transition points that occurred during teenage and young adult years. You'll see here, right, sexual identity specific individual and interpersonal protective factors. And a new abbreviation that was unfamiliar to me, YLBWLWs. And I think as you read the rest, I do think this is a very important, well, first of all, this is an important project in and on its own. One reason one inspiration for this FOA was obviously the increase in social media and texting among everyone in the United States, particularly young people, and cyberbullying and the self-harm and sometimes suicides that young people sadly decided upon when they were shunned in this regard through those means. What else I think is important is what we're seeing in younger populations is a greater flexibility in sexual identity and gender identity, things that are much more fluid and open to change over time. So I think it's possible that this project we will not only can be used for its specific purpose, but also in a broader sense contribute to the larger body of knowledge in terms of sexual gender identities among young people and maintaining mental health. Questions about this one? Hearing silence, I'll move on. You likely can tell from the graphic on this slide that this is a project among young people with autism and autism spectrum disorder. And young people with autism have higher rates of loneliness than people without it, otherwise known as the TD, the typical population. And in their model, they see that there is a protective factor of interpersonal relationships with their peers that they believe is a ameliorative factor for people with autism. And here you can see relating to our framework, the integration of neural, cognitive, affective, and behavioral levels of analyses to look at both the risks and the protective mechanisms, what we might think of as resilience in the emergence of loneliness among adolescents with and without autism spectrum disorder, and to determine the differences between the groups and build upon that knowledge to perhaps toward interventions, clinical trials, and diffusion through implementation science, if you will. This is a project that NIMH was so struck with that it paid for it in full. Personally, I think another strength is the way that they have matched young people with autism and those in the typical population. Questions? Okay. Earlier, I mentioned something that was a high priority to this concept team, and this project that came in rather spoke to that. Social media, violence, and social isolation among adolescents. In this project, they have 240 young people who have self-presented to the emergency department in this 6-month cohort study. The data include online social messages, interpersonal reactions with the electronically activated recorder, and ecological momentary assessment for self-reported mood, loneliness, and self-perceived loneliness, and accounts of peer victimization. You'll also see that they're getting surveys over that time. And current technologies, though they can put people at risk, the benefit is that they also allow for this rich, sometimes live, and contextual data collection that will allow this research group to dive into this rich data and develop constructs in the relationships between social connectedness, peer victimization, and their mental health, and then look at the other factors of that may influence vulnerability or resistance against the victimization. This is a project that NICHD and OppNet funds together. Anyone have points about this? The second receipt date that was on a slide earlier was one we added it expressly to account for the natural experiment that sadly COVID has brought us. This project came in in the first wave, but of course I wouldn't be surprised if they've already written. Is it Layla Esposito, I think, is the program director for this, about modifying it. I'm going to make a note to check on that. Thank you.
Very good.
This is the last project to share with you, and some of what both you and Laverne said are, and will follow on the next slide. This is a project that NIDA plans to fund in its next council round. It came to Nora Volkov's attention, and she was rather excited about it, and I hope you all will be too. And again, though it doesn't use the R word, but as you can see here, we all know through the HEAL initiative and another national tragedy that is the opioid epidemic. Naltrexone is, in its own way, if you pardon the expression, a wonder drug because it interrupts that that high that people can get from opioids. The one side effect of naltrexone, however, is that the side effects lead people to want to isolate and be alone. And that's a real problem for people in recovery, many of whom rely on their standard social connections or connections with other people who are in recovery to help maintain their sobriety, particularly after they have done any residential treatment and they are going on about their daily lives. And when, of course, they are free to self-isolate. And in this project, they want to collect advanced information through, as you can see here, self-reported feelings and the neural signatures, and eventually lead to some hypotheses to test that can lead to more effective naltrexone-based treatment strategies. So the first summary point is to echo what Laverne said at the beginning of our meeting. Congratulations. Though the R word isn't used in every single one of these projects, you could see elements of our entire rubric in these projects. In the second point. So, for example, use findings that could build resilience among adolescents and young people with autism spectrum disorder, or doing basic research so we potentially can augment outpatient opioid treatment so patients are resilient, or because they have the skills to recognize and act against those potential side effects. What we might do from this is, when we conduct portfolio and gap analyses, perhaps add some words to our work. Some of the terms that are used in these and other projects we might find from future discussions. And then, as part of our communication strategies, when appropriate, to reach out to these other communities that are doing very similar or perhaps the same work, or work that can be harmonized, but still can contribute to the common mission that we share in building more physically and mentally healthy people.